Hello everyone, welcome to the new video. In the last video we discussed about the evolution of poetry. Today we are going to deal with the two main categories of poetry. As you know, the two major categories of poetry are narrative and lyric poetry. So what is narrative poetry? First of all, let us discuss the different genres that come under narrative poetry. Narrative poetry includes genres like long poem, romance, ballad. And these poems tell stories with structured plots. And what is lyric poetry? Lyric poetry deals with one event or one impression or one idea. And it is shorter than narrative poetry. And when we see some of the precursors of modern lyric poetry, which can be found in Old English riddles and charms. And what is this charms? Charms are often magical or cultic texts like the charm against winds, which is used for healing purposes. Example for the charm is this against winds, which is supposed to help to get rid of boils. Seems strange today, but were common in that period. And it commands a boil to shrink and disappear using metaphorical language involving nature, like wolves, eagles. And these charms played a role in preserving early cultural text and literature. Then now comes to riddles. Riddles are another early form of poetry, often playful with language. And these are found in the Exeter book, a 10th century manuscript with over 100 Old English riddles. Some riddles use double meanings or such as obscene answers for humorous or intriguing effects. For example, riddle 44 describes an object hanging by a man's thigh which uses suggestive language but refers to a key. So it shows that riddles also focuses on handling themes like sexuality subtly rather than explicitly stating them. Now let us discuss about the poetic evolution. Early poetry, which had cultic origins, evolved to use language more artistically. That is, the next step in poetic expression abandons these overtly cultic origins and use music as a medium, creating songs. Here we have an example like cuckoo song, which could be sung and accompanied by instruments. Sing cuckoo, which imitates the sound of the bird. As you know, verbal imitation of natural sounds is known as onomatopoeia. And here it describes nature in bloom as summer arrives. And the caustic elements are seen here. They are the key features of both Middle English poetry and modern prop songs. When we see medieval lyric poetry, there we can see how the popular lyrical short forms focused on love. And they were often sung with instrumental accompaniment. And these lyrical poetry was influenced by provincial troubadours. And these provincial troubadours were the lyric poets or musicians who lived in the south of France and the north of Italy from 11th to 13th century. And they composed and sang in the old provincial dialect of the Occitan language, and they focused on courtly love. An example for that is German Mine Song. Walter von der Vogelweid's Under the Lime Tree is an example for that. And it exemplifies this mutual relationship between love, poetry, and music. It also says about love and nature with bodily themes like the sexual act. It describes a meeting between lovers under a lime tree. And there we have an imagery of crushed flowers and pressed grass symbolizes their interaction also. And this poem contrasts courtly love with more intimate physical expressions of love. And how the indirect expression is being shown in poetry. The refrain Tandarandal imitates the nightingale's call using onomatopoeia. Remember, onomatopoeia is the verbal imitation of natural sounds. That is a common element in lyrical poetry. Modern songwriters like Bob Dylan continue to blend music and poetic language in a similar way. And the next form is elegy. And what is this elegy? As you know, an elegy is a poetic form that laments the death of a loved one. That is, we can see the sorrow of someone for someone. For example, Old English elegies, they mourned personal loss. Pierre de Ronsard revived the elegy during the French Renaissance. Later, Thomas Gray's elegy, written in a country churchyard, which was published in 1751, and Walt Whitman's When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, which was published in 1865, came out as elegies. And Gaudi's Roman elegies combined themes of loss with eroticism inspired by ancient Latin poets. Then another form is ode, which is a very important, common, interesting form. It's a serious form of poetry from classical antiquity revived during the Renaissance. A very famous example for ode is John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, which was published in 1820, which is structured in multiple stanzas with a classical theme. Then now we move to sonnet. Sonnet is a form with a fixed rhyming pattern emerged during the Renaissance, and it often explores themes of worldly love. And in sonnet we have Italian sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, Miltonic sonnet, etc. And now we are moving to discuss the unique aspects of poetry. How this poetry is different from the other genres, or why it is different. While some features of fiction also apply to poetry, poetry has distinctive elements such as rhythm and sound that are central to its analysis. Now let us discuss image or imagery, which is a very important factor in poetry. This particular word imagery, it is derived from the Latin word imago, meaning picture, and it refers to a visual component in a text but can also involve other sensory impressions. Imagery helps make abstract themes more concrete and accessible. And what is the concrete character of poetry? When imagery is central to poetry and is achieved on three interrelated levels. The three interrelated levels of poetry or imagery are verbal dimension, visual dimension, rhythmic acoustic dimension. Verbal dimension, there we can see language choice or diction, rhetorical figures, and theme are important. In visual dimension, imagery in the form of emblems or concrete poetry becomes important. Rhythmic acoustic dimension gives importance to rhyme, meter, and sound devices like onomatopoeia. Now it says about the relation between verbal dimension and speaker. In poetry, the voice or speaker is analogous to the narrator in fiction. When we have a narrator in fiction, at the same time we have a speaker in poem. So poetry often reflects personal or subjective events, but this is not always the case. Subjective events means poets, they usually tell about their life or their feelings. That is why it becomes personal or subjective. But there are some other poems where we cannot see this personal or subjective elements. So the relationship between the speaker and author can be important to analyze. Now we have the complex narrative situations in poetry. That is, we have longer poems which may have complex narrative structures similar to novels or short stories, like Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which uses a frame narrative with two layers. Like the first one is a figural narrative, where we can see the mariner addressing the wedding guest. Then we have a first person narration, where the mariner recounting his adventures. So this highlights the layers of imagery, narrative structure, and poetic elements that is discussed in the original text. Now we have ballads which sit between long epics and short lyric forms. Ballads also have well developed plots and narrative perspectives, but they are less complex than epics and romances. Then, how the poetry is different from other literary genres. That is, all these features make poetry different from other literary genres. Poetic language, it relies on concrete nouns and imagery. That's the first thing that makes different. Then concrete scenes, we have concrete scenes which help make abstract things like human transitoriness more tangible. Like in Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard, how he uses concrete images like cemeteries, bells, and tombstones to explore the abstract theme of transitoriness. Likewise, we have W.H. Auden's elegy, which was published in 1936, that is, Stop All the Clocks, Cut Off the Telephone. Here, he uses everyday objects like clocks, phones, and common experiences, that is, work week, Sunday rest, etc. So, these images make mourning relatable and emotionally powerful. So, this is for today. Thank you.